Air Force's mascot of the Falcons was chosen by a popular vote of the Academy's class of 1959, which was their first graduating class. It was originally the Cadet Wing mascot in 1955, and it was chosen because it best characterized the Air Force as a whole due to its speed, courage, and aggressive nature. The Zips nickname was chosen in 1925 as a reference to the city of Akron's rich history with rubber, specifically a type of rubber shoe called a zipper that was a common export of Akron in its industrial days. It was originally zippers as a whole until the university moved to the common shorthand of zips in 1950. Alabama's nickname of the Crimson Tide comes from a 1907 newspaper article on a football game between Alabama and Auburn. Muddy conditions had left the playing field a mess, and after a 6-6 tie, the Birmingham Age Herald noted that the players appeared like a crimson tide through the mud. Until then, they'd been known as the Crimson and White, or even just the 11. Nestled in the Appalachian Mountains, it's no surprise that App State chose Mountaineers as its mascot in 1948. Up until then, App State didn't have a specific mascot, but after a series of newspaper articles depicted a fictional character known as Yosef, fans began to refer to themselves as Mountaineers. In 1983, the nickname was made official, and it's stuck ever since. Arizona's Wildcats nickname comes from a 1914 newspaper article covering a game they played against Occidental College. The LA Times noted that they showed a level of fight consistent with Wildcats. The university was so taken with the nickname that they had an actual Bobcat at some of their games the next season, nicknamed Rufus, Arizona. Arizona State athletics teams were originally referred to as the Owls, then a Bulldog to make it seem more like Yale. The students disliked the nickname, and in 1946 they voted to change it officially to the Sun Devils, which has a double meaning. One, a Sun Devil is also known as a whirling dervish or a dust devil. On the other hand, the mascot is taken literally as an actual devil, as shown by their costumed mascot Sparky, combining the devilish nature of an imp with the oppressive heat the state of Arizona is known for. The first mascot the University of Arkansas chose was the Cardinals, but this was changed in 1909 when head football coach Hugo Bedzik likened the tenacity of his 7-0 team to a pack of Razorback hogs. Feral pigs are common in the American South and are well known for their aggression and difficulty to bring down. Arkansas State has gone through a lot of different names. They first went by the Aggies in 1911, then the Gorillas in 1925, and the Warriors in 1930 before settling on the nickname of the Indians in 1931, after the Osage Nation in the area. They were known as the Indians until 2007, when they decided to change their mascot to something less racially sensitive, going with the Red Wolves in 2008. This was chosen out of a list of other potential nicknames, including the A's, Diamonds, Express, Mallards, Ridge Runners, Ridge Riders, Dragons, and Thunderbirds. At least officially, West Point's athletics teams were just known as the Cadets for the longest time, with the Black Knights of the Hudson being a prominent nickname for the team. But the nickname became so popular that it was used interchangeably with Cadets all the way through 1999, when West Point officially changed their name to the Black Knights. Auburn has always been known as the Tigers, ever since their first football game against Georgia in 1892. Uniquely, they're actually named after a 1700s poem, Oliver Goldsmith's The Deserted Village, which includes a line about crouching tigers. They've never been known as the Eagles or War Eagles. Ball State has always been one of the most unique schools in the country to me, and even more so when I discovered their original nickname was the Hoosieroons. But the name was consistently made fun of in the 1920s, so they looked over a list of potential new nicknames, including Goblins, Scrappin' Teachers, and Muncie Gleaners. I went with Cardinals in 1927, after their athletic director saw a St. Louis Cardinals sweatshirt and remembered that the Cardinal was the state bird of Indiana. Bears feels like a common college sports nickname until you realize that, until this next year, Baylor's been the only FBS team to have it. Bears are common throughout much of the United States, but the black bear, the animal Baylor is named after, was especially prominent in Texas around when Baylor was founded. As far as I'm concerned, from what I've looked up, the Bears have always been Baylor's nickname. Boise State's first year of classes as a junior college in 1832 and 1833 yielded a nickname when students picked Broncos, which represented the wild horses that were known to live in the areas surrounding Boise and Idaho. The first depiction of Boston College's athletics teams was a cartoon cat eating its rivals after a track meet. Apparently this wasn't good enough, and Reverend Edward McLaughlin suggested an eagle as an official mascot instead in 1920, for its, quote, majesty, power, and freedom. Like most Midwestern colleges, Bowling Green's athletics team started out with a lot of weird nicknames. Starting in 1919, the team went by names like the Normals, Teachers, and Pedagogues, But in 1927, their head coach Doc Lake suggested calling them the Falcons, and it was so popular it was officially adopted by the school in 1928. Unsurprisingly, the University at Buffalo athletics teams were originally known as the Bison, but a multitude of other sports programs in the Buffalo area also went by the Bison. I guess nobody was too creative. The women's teams went by the Royals for a while until the men's team stayed as the Bison until 1997, when all teams moved towards Bulls as their official nickname. BYU first went by the Cougars in the 1920s, following a suggestion by Eugene Roberts. The nickname originally only applied to the football team, though, but by the 1950s, all sports teams at BYU went by Cougars officially. The Cal Golden Bears, not the Bears, specifically Golden Bears, was first used in 1895, following the flagship's immense success in track and field. A grizzly bear, the state symbol of California, was featured on banners during that time frame, and the amalgamation of California's nickname of the Golden State and the state animal of the bear manifested in the Golden Bears. CMU's first nickname was actually the Dragons in 1925, but the nickname wasn't as popular among students. Before then, they were casually referred to as the Normalites. In 1927, students chose the nickname Bearcats, which stuck until 1941, when a football coach suggested the nickname of Chippewas due to its geographical and cultural connection to the history of the Central Michigan region. Charlotte's nickname of the 49ers has nothing to do with gold panning or mining, despite what some logos and branding would have you believe. In 1949, the university that would later become Charlotte was saved from shutting down. To embody the spirit of their resurrection, Charlotte athletics went by 49ers in reference to the year. Before then, they'd been known as the Owls. The Bearcat, or Binturong, doesn't actually have much to do with Cincy's nickname. It originated in a 1914 game against the Kentucky Wildcats. A prominent player on Cincy's roster was named Leonard Bear, and a chant started during the game. They may be the Wildcats, but we have a Bearcat on our side. The nickname stuck after a newspaper cartoon showed Kentucky being beaten by the Cincinnati Bearcats. Clemson first started going by the Tigers in 1896, when their coach, who had come from Auburn, just imported the name to his new team. All athletics teams at Clemson since then have been known as the Tigers, though for a brief moment their official costumed mascot was just a guy in a purple suit known as the Southern Gentleman. Coastal Carolina's nickname of the Chanticleers was chosen in a very unique way. For one, it comes from a Geoffrey Chaucer poem in the Canterbury Tales describing a rooster with teal colors. But it was also chosen as an homage to their parent campus, South Carolina, who had gone by the Gamecocks for a while. The Chanticleer is another name for a rooster and an English teacher, because only an English teacher would name an athletics program after a Chaucer poem, suggested the name in 1963. Before 1934, athletics teams at Colorado went by the Frontiersmen, but in 1934 the university officially adopted the nickname of Buffaloes after the historically prominent bison populations in the state. Colorado State has had a multitude of mascots since their founding. Their first official mascot was a bulldog, followed by a bear cub, and then another bulldog. It wasn't until 1945 that the students at the university decided that the Rocky Mountain Ram best fit the culture of the university, and the university's been known as the Rams ever since. Delaware's nickname of the Fightin' Blue Hens is actually a lot more tied into the state than one would think. The Delaware Blue Hen is the official state bird of Delaware, and it became so after a particular regiment in the Revolutionary War named themselves after the cocky breed of poultry. Not only that, but there are more chickens in the state of Delaware than there are people, so the Blue Hen's nickname is more than apt. Back when Duke was originally known as Trinity College, their nicknames were things like the Blue and White or the Methodists. But in 1922, the student newspaper chose to refer to their teams as the Blue Devils, in reference to a French Alpine division in World War I, nicknamed Les Diables Bleus, or the Blue Devils, who wore blue uniforms and capes. ECU was originally known as the Teachers until 1934, when they adopted the nickname of the Pirates. Pirates were common nautical dangers along North Carolina's coasts due to the many geographical safe havens for them along coastlines. EMU chose its nickname of the Eagles in 1991, after going by the Hurons since 1929, and after it was selected from a contest over another nickname of the Pioneers. The Huron people were native to the region surrounding Ypsilanti. Other than the Hurons, EMU also went by the Men from Ypsi and the Normalites. Unlike most other teams named the Owls, Florida Atlantic is named after a very specific type of owl native to the Boca Raton area. The burrowing owl is native to the area where FAU's campus is, and the campus is even known as a wildlife refuge for the species. When the university started athletics programs in the 1980s, the burrowing owl was a no-brainer pick for the team's mascots. FIU is an example of a team that I think made the wrong decision with their nickname. When they first started their athletics programs in the 80s, they were known as the Sunblazers, but made the switch to the Florida Panther in 1987, being known as the Golden Panthers. They took the term Golden out of their name in 2011, becoming just the Panthers. Gators are synonymous with Florida, but UF's nickname has an interesting history. A lawyer from Virginia was studying at Gainesville in 1907 when his father came down from Virginia. His dad owned a stationery store, and he and his son ordered some sports pennants from a store up in Virginia and realized Florida didn't have an official nickname. The son suggested an alligator, but the dad didn't know what an alligator was, coming from Virginia. After learning, they decided on the Gators name for Florida, and the pennants were widely bought. Florida State picked its nickname a little later than most other Power Conference programs in history, with their students choosing the name Seminoles in 1947. The Seminole tribe was widely known in Florida for their resistance against the United States' efforts to remove them from their home in the state of Florida. FSU students liked the storied characteristics of the Seminole tribe and wanted their athletics teams to be thought of in the same manner. Unique to most other Native American nicknames, FSU's usage of Seminoles isn't actually a mascot, but something they use out of admiration. Members of the Florida Seminole tribe officially sanction the university's usage of the name. One of many bulldogs, Fresno State's usage of the nickname Bulldogs actually comes from a stray bulldog that would greet students outside the main campus building in 1921. It caught the hearts of the student body, and the student president passed a motion for the teams to be called the Bulldogs that year. The Georgia Bulldogs earned their name in 1901, after a badge was created that featured a bulldog with the phrase "Eat 'em Georgia" was created and passed around. Later, in 1920, the university officially started pushing their athletics teams as the Bulldogs. Some other historical retellings have Georgia's nickname attributed to Yale's success on the football field. Georgia Southern was originally known as the Blue Tide from 1924 to 1941, and then the Professors from 1941 to 1958. But in 1959, when the school was renamed, students voted for a new nickname and chose the Eagles over the Colonels. Georgia State has gone by the Panthers since 1963. It was chosen by a student vote. Occasionally throughout their history, they were referred to as the Crimson Panthers, as Georgia State bounced back and forth between having blue and red as their primary color. Before then, however, GSU went by the Owls and then the Ramblers. Georgia Tech wasn't known as the Yellow Jackets for a while. They were first known as the Engineers, Blacksmiths, and Golden Tornadoes. It was the fans who were called the Yellow Jackets because of the yellow jackets they would wear to sporting events. In 1905, head coach John Heisman began calling his teams the Yellow Jackets as well, and it stuck. Hawaii's nickname of the Rainbow Warriors comes in a few parts. From its inception in 1909 to 1923, the football teams at UH Manoa were known as the Deans. During the final game of the 1923 season against Oregon State, a rainbow appeared above the stadium, earning the team the nickname of Rainbows. This blended with Hawaiian history, as King Kamehameha the Great's military might united the Hawaiian Islands, and looking back on the state's history, the team became known as the Rainbow Warriors. The name became official in 1974, and has stuck around even after a brief moment in the 2000s when some men's teams dropped the Rainbow moniker. The women's teams are known as the Rainbow Wahine, with Wahine being standard Hawaiian for women. Houston first began being known as the Cougars after their PE professor in the 1920s, John Bender, suggested the name. Bender had previously been the head coach at Washington State, among other schools, and imported the name and colors from there. Illinois has been known as the Fighting Illini pretty much from their beginning. The word comes from a group of Native Americans that lived in the area, the Illiniwek. Long before their athletics programs started, Illinois student newspapers called themselves the Illini. The term grew to accompany the students, and by 1911, the student athletes in Champaign. A Hoosier is the nickname for people from Indiana, which makes sense as to why the Indiana athletics program is called that. Indiana is one of a few teams whose athletics nickname is just what people from the state are called. Another one is Iowa. Iowa is known as the Hawkeye State, owing to a story of a white Native American scout and the story The Last of the Mohicans, as well as the name of a newspaper in Fort Madison. Soon it became the name for anyone from Iowa, as well as the term Iowan, and the athletics programs at the University of Iowa took on the moniker pretty much immediately. The state of Iowa sits within a geographical region known as Tornado Alley, which is known for its ability to produce tornadoes. Iowa State has gone by the Cyclones since at least 1895, when the state was ravaged by a higher than normal amount of tornadoes. That year, Iowa State beat Northwestern 36-0 in a football game, with a newspaper noting that Northwestern might as well have played an Iowa Cyclone. The Cardinal featured as a mascot and on some logos is a different story. When Iowa State tried to create a costume Cyclone mascot in 1954, nothing really worked. It's hard to make a tornado into a costume. Instead, they leaned into ISU's colors of cardinal and gold and chose a cardinal bird to be their costumed mascot. Weirdly enough, Jacksonville State's first official mascot was the eagle owl, a bird found nowhere near Alabama, but they made the switch in 1946 to Gamecocks to better fit the style and culture of an agriculture-minded institution in the Deep South. Originally the Fighting Gamecocks in 1947, over time it was shortened to just the Gamecocks. James Madison University is named after James Madison, the president, but their nickname belongs to a completely different president, that being Samuel Page Duke, the second president of James Madison from 1919 to 1949, who just so happened to famously own a bulldog, which is also on the logo of James Madison. He was nicknamed the Builder for how much he built for the university, so it's pretty easy to see why he's revered with the nickname. There's lots of history with KU's nickname of the Jayhawks, stretching all the way back to Bleeding Kansas and the tragic prelude to the Civil War. Simply put, a Jayhawker was the nickname given to militant Kansas abolitionists who would literally fight Missourians to the death to keep slavery out of Kansas. It's so unfortunate that the University of Kansas has probably the hardest nickname in all of college sports, and it's also unfortunate that they are the Jayhawks, a fictional bird, and not the Jayhawkers, the name of those Civil War heroes. But it's semantics. I'm definitely not biased. K-State, like a lot of agricultural schools, started out being known as the Aggies and briefly the Farmers before they officially adopted the nickname of the Wildcats in 1920, based on a nickname that former coach John Bender gave his team. Bobcats are native to the state of Kansas, like they are pretty much everywhere, but it was the veracity of his football teams that reminded Coach Bender of the Wildcats, and the name has stuck ever since. First starting athletics as an NAIA school in the early 1980s and just having started a football program 10 years ago, Kennesaw State has come a long way in a short time. They chose the Owl nickname because of its tenacity and intelligence with the gold of Georgia Tech and the black of Georgia. Kent State's mascot history is tough to track down. In 1923, they were known as the Silver Foxes because their campus was next to a fox ranch, and then a university-wide Name the Athletics Team contest resulted in the name Golden Flashes in 1928. The name was apparently a knockoff of Cal's Golden Bears nickname and is meant to be a thunderbolt. Like most teams nicknamed the Wildcats, Kentucky earned their nickname after a particularly hard-fought football game against Illinois in 1909. Commandant Philip Corbiachet told students at a chapel service the following Sunday that the kids, quote, fought like wildcats, and over time it grew to accompany all the sports in Kentucky. Founded by evangelical pastor Jerry Falwell in 1971, Liberty had always sought to help bolster the reputation of their university by investing in athletic success. Their nickname comes from the university's motto, chosen in 1974, which reads, "Knowledge Aflame." When it came time to pick a nickname, Flames was the obvious choice. There might not be a more apt geopolitical nickname for a university than Louisiana at Lafayette's nickname of the Ragin' Cajuns. Back when they were still Southwestern Louisiana Industrial in 1921, they went by the Bulldogs, but a strong 1963 football team earned the nickname of the Ragin' Cajuns. Cajuns are a prominent ethnic group in southern Louisiana, and the name proved to be so popular that the teams just officially adopted the nickname in 1964. For nearly 75 years since their inception in the 1930s, UL Monroe, or at that point Ouachita Parish Community College, had gone by the nickname of the Indians, clear through their university-wide name change to Northeastern Louisiana University. But in 2006, the now UL Monroe decided that the nickname was inappropriate and posted an online poll to help choose a team nickname. Students chose between Bayou Gators, Bayou Hawks, and Warhawks, and chose the latter. The name Warhawks honors Major General Claire Lee Chenot, a Louisianan pilot who led a unit of Warhawk fighter planes in World War II. Louisiana Tech is one of a few universities that has separate nicknames for their men's and women's teams. The men's teams are known as the Bulldogs, owing to an 1899 story about Tech students who were saved from a house fire by a stray bulldog they'd met earlier that day. The women's teams are known as the Lady Techsters, since the term Bulldogs was apparently not feminine enough for the teams once women's teams started play in 1974. Women's basketball coach Sonia Hogg was obsessed with her players being ladylike, right down to not wearing knee pads and forcing her players to wear long sleeves. This unique culture of change was so prominent, the nickname of Lady Techsters became more cultural than anything else at La Tech, and it stuck. Louisville first started their athletics programs in the early 1900s and went with the name Cardinals almost as soon as they started. The stories the name Cardinals came from Ellen Patterson, the wife of the dean at the time, who also suggested red and black as the colors for the team. There is some discrepancy there as to whether or not that's the actual case, though. LSU's nickname of the Tigers isn't as cut and dry as copying from Princeton. Back in the Civil War, there was a regiment called the Louisiana Tigers that was apparently known for its tenaciousness. So when it came time for LSU, with roots as a military school, to choose a nickname, Tigers made the most sense. According to Marshall themselves, the university originally had its sports teams known as the Big Green, just like Dartmouth or the Ivy League. But a sports writer in Huntington called the football team the Thundering Herd in a 1925 edition of the local newspaper, calling forth the image of a herd of bison. Maryland chose to go with the local fauna for their mascot, becoming the only D1 school named after a turtle by selecting the Maryland terrapin as their mascot. Before 1932, the Maryland teams were known as the Old Liners, but football coach Curly Bird wanted to find a new nickname. While the student newspaper was asking for ideas, Coach Bird suggested the terrapin, and the university gladly accepted. Memphis State's first few athletics teams were known as the Blue and Gray Warriors, but in 1914, a student parade ended with chants of "We Fight Like Tigers." It grew to accompany sports over the next few years before the athletics teams at Memphis was later officially known as the Tigers in 1939. As can be expected, Miami's nickname of the Hurricanes came up as the result of a recent tropical cyclone rolling through the Miami area. But the trouble comes with the fact that nobody can really exact how the name was chosen. One source says that the name Hurricanes was chosen in 1927, following the 1926 hurricane, by a team meeting of student athletes, who didn't like the idea of naming themselves after an animal or plant from the area instead. Miami of Ohio has a tough history with their nickname. They bounced around between the Miami Boys, Red and Whites, and Big Reds until 1928, when they settled on the nickname of the Redskins. But in 1992, after pressure from civil liberties unions, the actual Miami tribe in Oklahoma, and a growing distaste for the racial slur in student circles, the university made the switch to Red Hawks, invoking the red-tailed hawk. Famously, the Michigan Wolverines have never had a mascot for two reasons: tradition and the fact that Wolverines are notoriously ferocious. But the reason they're called the Wolverines, like Iowa, is pretty simple. Michigan is the Wolverine state, despite there not being a lot of evidence to show for Wolverines living there until the early 2000s. Students referred to themselves as Wolverines before sports even became a thing at UM. Michigan head coach Fielding Yost had a theory that it traced back to old Native American fur traders in Sault Ste. Marie featuring Wolverine pelts prominently. Michigan State started its athletics program known as the Aggies. Following some time, though, they decided to move past the nickname, holding a contest to determine a new mascot in 1925. They came up with the Staters. Writer George Alderton thought the name was terrible, and started peppering the name Spartans in his post-game recaps. The name caught on over time. MTSU's Blue Raiders nickname comes from Charles Sarver, a football player on the 1934 team whose suggestion won a newspaper contest. Before then, players were known as the Normalites, Teachers, or Pedagogues. Minnesota's nickname of the Golden Gophers is similar in origin to Cal's. Minnesota is known as the Gopher State, coming from an 1858 political cartoon depicting state politicians as gophers. As soon as Minnesota started a university yearbook, it was known as the Gopher, and by 1926, the sports teams at Minnesota were officially referred to as the Gophers. Radio broadcaster Halsey Hall referred to the teams on radio as the Golden Gophers because of their color scheme, and the name was later updated to include the adjective as well. Mississippi State's athletics teams were originally known as the Aggies, and then later the Maroons since their name changed to Mississippi State College in 1932, but they had occasionally been known as the Bulldogs since 1905. They made the full-time switch to Bulldogs in 1960 after a campus legend involving burying Ole Miss in a mock military parade and placing a bulldog on top of the shoddily made coffin. Missouri's football teams were first known as the Tigers in 1890, in honor of a Union Civil War militia based out of Columbia that defended the city from roving bands of Confederate sympathizers in the state of Missouri. Missouri State becomes just the second FBS team to be known as the Bears, following Baylor for the longest time. They earned the name in 1906, while barely a university, after a joint committee of students and professors chose both the colors and the mascot. Missouri State's seal features 3 bears, so the nickname made sense. As an odd aside, the women's beach volleyball team is known as the Beach Bears. This one might be the most straightforward of any team nickname. Navymen are known as midshipmen, and have been since at least the 1600s. Navy's athletics teams have always been known as the midshipmen because of it. But the goat comes from an old Navy mascot nicknamed El Cid. Goats were common on Navy ships because they handled the open ocean better than most other livestock did. El Cid's legacy carried throughout the United States Navy until the goat became a common mascot for the entire branch. Like many other agricultural universities, NC State featured its fair share of pejoratives from other universities looking to install classist nicknames against what it had been known as for years, the Aggies, Techs, or Farmers. But in 1921, an anonymous graduate recommended the university rename themselves to the Wolves. At the same time, a newspaper called NC State fans an unruly pack of wolves. NC State fans quickly adopted the nickname and have been known as the Wolfpack ever since. Nebraska's nickname history is one of the most interesting in college sports. They ran through a whole bunch of nicknames early on, like the Old Gold Knights, Antelopes, Rattlesnake Boys, and Bug Eaters. Bug Eaters was established in 1892, named after insectivorous bats that roamed Nebraska. But after a few losing seasons, sports writer Charles Sherman decided in 1899 that he would start referring to them as the Cornhuskers to try and change their luck. Cornhuskers was actually originally a rejected nickname from Iowa, but it fit Nebraska more. It might be the only nickname in college history that actually became the nickname for the state and not the other way around, as it became so popular that Nebraska eventually became known as the Cornhusker State. When Nevada first started their athletics programs in 1896, they were known as the Sagebrushes, after the state flower. But in 1921, a local sports writer referred to the teams as a pack of desert wolves. In 1923, the students chose to change the teams' nicknames to wolves officially. That eventually became the Wolf Pack, separated into two words. New Mexico's first nickname was the University Boys, and then the Varsities when they established the football team in 1892. By 1917, though, students were eager to find a new nickname. Some ideas were tossed out, including Rattlers, Sand Devils, Coyotes, and the Cherry and Silver. But in 1920, a student suggested the Spanish word for wolf, Lobo, and the nickname stuck. As a land-grant institution, New Mexico State's men's teams have always been known as the Aggies ever since the university started playing sports. But the women's teams used to be known as the Roadrunners until 2000, when they adopted the men's team's nicknames. North Carolina's nickname of the Tar Heels stretches back into the state's infancy. North Carolina became known for its exports of tar when it was still a colony, earning its citizens the pejorative nickname of tar boilers. Later, during the Civil War, Confederate troops from North Carolina earned the nickname of Tar Heels after the Battle of Murfreesboro. They were made fun of as cowards and idiots, hence the heels part of the nickname. But over time, following the war, the citizens of North Carolina began to accept the term and turn it into a point of pride. North Carolina became the Tar Heel State, and UNC became the Tar Heels. Contrary to popular belief, North Texas's nickname of the Mean Green actually doesn't have anything to do with Mean Joe. In 1966, Joe Green was having an incredible season, but he was just one player on an excellent North Texas defense, who just so happened to wear green. The defense in general became known as the Mean Green later that season. Despite that, officially, North Texas was known as the Eagles since 1920, choosing that nickname over the Hawks or Dragons. When Northern Illinois' athletics teams first started competition in 1899, they were known as the Profs. This later changed to the Cardinals in 1920 and the Evansmen after George Evans in the 30s. But in 1940, the team officially chose the nickname of Huskies, owing to wanting something more unique to the Midwest. Northwestern's teams were originally known as the Purple in the 1890s due to the university's then unique color scheme. By the 1920s, though, the students were looking to find a new nickname. After a failed season testing a bear mascot to invoke the Chicago Bears, they kept with Purple until a hard-fought loss to Chicago in 1924 earned their football coach the nickname of Wildcat. Soon, all of Northwestern's teams became known as the Wildcats, owing to a Wildcat spirit they hoped the entire university would embody. They almost changed their name again later to the Purple Haze, but stuck with Wildcats. There are tons of stories as to how Notre Dame ended up becoming the Fighting Irish. The most widely accepted story, though, is less dramatic. During the early 1900s, Irish Americans were subject to many negative stereotypes and pejoratives. Catholics were subject to similar discrimination at the time. Newspapers often referred to Notre Dame teams as just the Catholics, Papists, or the, quote, dirty Irish due to the large amounts of Irish Catholic immigrants going to the school there. But following the success of Knute Rockne's football teams, it was harder to use pejoratives for the school, and student newspapers began to use the term Fighting Irish to reclaim their dignity and success. Essentially, Notre Dame reclaimed a slur and turned it into a point of pride. Ohio's nickname of the Bobcats comes from a student in 1896, Hal Rowland, who won a contest to officially name the athletics teams. He chose the Bobcat to embody a fighting spirit, and the university has been known as the Bobcats ever since. Ohio State's nickname of the Buckeyes comes from the state of Ohio's nickname as the Buckeye State. A buckeye is a poisonous nut from the buckeye tree native to Ohio that resembles the eye of a deer, hence the name. Settlers to Ohio found the Nuts' appearance interesting, and later on Ohio residents became known as Buckeyes. Ohio State went without an official nickname until 1950 when the university officially adopted Buckeyes as its mascot. Originally known as the Rough Riders and the Boomers, Oklahoma adopted the nickname of Sooners in 1908. Both Boomers and Sooners were nicknames given to people who rushed in to settle the native-designated Oklahoma territory before the land was officially open for white settlers to claim away from Native Americans. To put it lightly, a Sooner is literally a dirt burglar. Oklahoma became officially known as the Sooner State after the university adopted it as a nickname, but Oklahomans have been known as Sooners since it was a territory. Oklahoma State was originally known as the Aggies, owing to its college name of Oklahoma A&M until 1923. They also had been occasionally referred to as Tigers or Prairie Tigers due to their orange and black color scheme resembling Princeton. But during the 1923 Armistice Day Parade, A&M students noticed famed cowboy Frank Eaton leading the procession. They asked him to literally be their new mascot, and a caricature, Pistol Pete, became the new mascot for Oklahoma A&M. By 1957, when A&M became Oklahoma State, the team was officially known as the Cowboys. Old Dominion's teams used to be known as the Braves back when they were still considered the Norfolk division of William & Mary University. William & Mary was the Indians, so Norfolk was the Braves. When Old Dominion grew from a 2-year branch to a 4-year institution on its own in the 60s, a new nickname was needed for the now independent university, and a committee made up of professors landed on Monarchs. A few months later, when the university started to choose a new name for itself, it leaned on the already selected nickname of Monarchs to land on Old Dominion, a reference to the royalty who originally established its parent college. Ole Miss selected Rebels as its nickname in 1936 as a popular pick in the former Confederate state. They had a costumed Confederate as their mascot until 2003. For reference, Ole Miss has been known as the Rebels for 22 times the amount of time that the actual Confederacy was a thing. They moved to a bear mascot in 2010, and then later an actual land shark in 2021, referencing a former Army veteran who played linebacker for the team in 2009. But officially, they're still known as the Rebels. Oregon started out with its teams being known as the Webfoots in 1890, which is another name for Irish fishermen from the Revolutionary War who would later settle the Oregon Territory. The university chose Webfoots as its official name in 1932, over other nicknames like the Pioneers, Trappers, and Lumberjacks. But the term Webfoot began to slowly bring to mind the image of a duck and not a fisherman. By the late 1930s, newspaper writers started to shorthand the university as the Ducks. To take advantage, Oregon signed a deal with Disney in 1940 to license the image of Donald Duck for the university, and the nickname changed forever to the Ducks. The official change from Webfoots to Ducks took place in a 1978 vote. As a land-grant school, Oregon State's first teams were known as the Aggies. When they adopted orange as a school color, they became the Orangemen. But with the state animal of Oregon being a beaver, the school's yearbook in 1916 was renamed to the Beaver. Athletics teams soon followed as being known as the Beavers, and the nickname stuck. Years before Penn State was founded, the Nittany region of Appalachia was a common place to find mountain lions. Penn State didn't have an official mascot through much of its early history up until a game against Princeton in 1904. Embarrassed that Penn State didn't have a mascot that could beat a tiger, student Joe Mason made up one on the spot, a Nittany lion. Originally an African lion, once he found out that Mount Nittany did indeed have mountain lions once upon a time, the image shifted to that of a cougar. Same animal, different terminology for Pittsburgh. The term Panther was officially adopted by students at the University of Pittsburgh in 1909 after its name changed from Western University of Pennsylvania. Before then, athletes were known as the Wups. The reasons for selecting Panthers, like Penn State, was due to the animal's historical prevalence in the Pennsylvania area, but it was also because of the animal's stance as a powerful North American predator, and the color of its coat being similar to the old gold in use by the university at the time. The alliteration with Pittsburgh is referred to as a happy accident. Purdue's nickname of the Boilermakers comes following an 1889 game against Wabash College that Purdue won 18-4. They earned a host of unofficial nicknames from the game, like Cornhuskers, Grangers, Pumpkin Shuckers, Rail Splitters, Blacksmiths, Corn Sailors, and Foundry Hands. Purdue students were able to learn how to build and operate locomotives at the time, but the allusion to trains only strengthened in 1891 when Purdue won 44-0. A local newspaper in Wabash stated that Wabash was snowed completely under by the burly Boilermakers from Purdue. They officially adopted Boilermakers as a nickname in 1892. Rice's teams officially became known as the Owls in their first season in 1912 after the owls that appear on the university's official crest. The first few teams at Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey, were known as the Scarlet, owing to their team's colors. They had also been known as the Queensmen back when they were known as Queens College. They moved to the Chanticleer in 1925 from Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, but along with Rutgers' athletic woes, the image of a chicken proved to create too many opportunities to get made fun of. So the team decided to change in 1955 after a campus-wide vote landed on the Scarlet Knight over the older nicknames as well as the Flying Dutchman and Redman. Unlike Cincinnati, Sam Houston's version of the Bearcats is spelled with a K. Before the university was known as Sam Houston State in 1923, the athletics teams were known as the Normalites. With the name change, the team adopted Bearcats with a C. After some time, the students wanted to differentiate from the real-life Bearcat into something more mythical, adopting the K in the name. In 1940, Sam Houston's president wanted to change the athletics names to the Ravens, after General Sam Houston's nickname of the Raven, but the students didn't want to change it. San Diego is far away from the generally accepted former borders of the Aztec Empire, famous for its power in the Oaxaca region of Mexico, but their legacy stretched far to the northwest and Southern California years later. In 1925, San Diego State, who had been known as the Wampus Cats, voted to take on the Aztec name for its athletics teams. Over time, the school's usage of the Aztec grew gradually more respectful. They're still determining what to do with the Aztec identity of the school, but it is much more respectful today than it used to be. Prior to 1922, San Jose State teams went by whatever people wanted to call them. Some names included the Daniels, Teachers, Pedagogues, and Normalites. In 1922, though, the school put names to a vote, and students and staff chose Spartans. They had wanted something fiercer, and thought that Spartans would embody a fierce spirit they would want their athletes to embody. SMU was founded in 1911 as a completely independent research institution from the university system in the state of Texas. By 1917, athletics were already starting to become a success point in Dallas, so the students at SMU chose the nickname of Mustangs to embody the independence and unbroken spirit they wanted SMU to always portray. Since 1932, a live pony named Peruna has trotted the sidelines at SMU games. South Alabama is a young university, being founded in 1963 and starting their athletics programs in 1965. The University Board of Trustees came up with the nickname of Jaguars to symbolize the courage and spirit of the university students. For a brief moment, USA also had a live jaguar named Mishka, but after someone left her cage unlocked and she took a stroll around campus in the 70s, it was decided that a live jaguar wasn't suited for being a mascot. South Carolina's nickname of the Gamecocks originates in the Revolutionary War. South Carolina General Thomas Sumter was known as the, quote, fighting gamecock due to his military tactics and unrelenting spirit. Decades later, in 1902, USC finally upset Clemson in a football game and proudly displayed a drawing of a gamecock beating a tiger in an impromptu victory parade. Clemson, then a military school, was so upset by this that they sent actual armed cadets into Columbia to shut it down. South Carolina became known as the Gamecocks ever since then, specifically to make fun of Clemson for being soft that one time. South Florida is another young university, only having been founded in 1956 and holding their first classes in 1960. Before any athletics teams even started play at USF, the students voted on the name of Golden Brahmin in 1962, in reference to Florida's long history in raising cattle. By 1981, though, Golden Brahmin became a bit of a mouthful, so they just shortened the term to Bulls. Southern Miss has a long history of mascot names, both good and bad. When the university first started sponsoring athletics teams, they went by the Tigers, then changed to Yellow Jackets in 1924. In 1940, the students at Southern Miss voted to change the athletics team name to better fit the university's new name as Mississippi Southern College. They chose the Confederates. The team was known as the Confederates for 1 year until they changed to the Southerners in 1941. That nickname lasted until 1972, when they had to choose another nickname again, this time settling on Golden Eagles over Raiders, Warlords, and Timberwolves. Stanford's first mascot of the Cardinal was given to them after beating Cal in an 1892 football game, derived from their red jerseys. In 1930, though, students at the university chose to pick a new nickname of Indians. This lasted until 1972, when Native American student groups had successfully protested for the removal of the nickname. During that time frame, though, Stanford had also been known as the Cardinal, or Cardinals. A few new names, such as sequoias, trees, huns, and griffins, were suggested in the 70s, but the team stuck as the Cardinal. Syracuse first chose the color of orange as its sports team's color due to the city's historical connection with the Netherlands. Due to its orange color scheme, the athletics teams at Syracuse were originally known as the Orangemen. This changed in 2004 due to the gendered terminology and the word orange women being hard to say, so they simplified it to just the Orange.
But occasionally, throughout history, Syracuse athletics teams had also unofficially been known as the Hilltoppers or Saltine Warriors, in reference to the Onondaga Nation who had existed in the Syracuse area. TCU's association with the blood-spurting horned frog, also known as the horned lizard, came in 1897 Adran College yearbook that featured the native Texan reptile. When Adran became Texas Christian University in 1902 and athletics teams sprouted up afterwards, the horned frog became a common pick for a mascot. Temple's nickname of the Owls actually has an interesting history. The university had featured owls as symbols since its founding in the 1880s, due to its nocturnal nature, and Temple had originally started its existence as a night school, so the owl made perfect sense. Like a few other universities on this list, Tennessee earned its name from the nickname of the state as a whole. This dates back to the War of 1812, when President James Madison called on volunteer militiamen in Tennessee to come to the aid of American soldiers in Mississippi against Great Britain. The Vols, as they were called, helped America win the Battle of New Orleans in 1815. Tennessee volunteers again proved a helping hand in the Mexican-American War, led by Davy Crockett. Since then, Tennessee has been known as the Volunteer State, and UT's athletics teams have also been known as Volunteers. Longhorn cattle had an important part to play in the history of the state of Texas, even before it became a state. So much so that the Texas Longhorn is considered Texas's official state large animal. Texas Austin was established in 1881, and as soon as 1900, their sports teams were referred to as the Longhorns. Like so many other schools to earn the land-grant distinction, Texas A&M's athletics teams were known as the Aggies as soon as they started sporting competition. At some point in the early 1900s, though, the school was also known as the Farmers, but Aggies won out as the nickname that resounded most with Aggie students. Central Texas is home to thousands of Bobcats, making them the easy selection for Texas State's mascot as soon as they started athletics competition in 1921. It was chosen by a committee, who picked the Bobcat due to the fact that it will, quote, fight you with everything it has, with 4 claws, teeth, speed, and brains. The first athletics teams from Texas Tech were known as the Matadors from 1925 to 1936 due to the Spanish Renaissance architecture culture in the Lubbock area. The colors of red and black followed soon afterward. But once Texas Tech started losing a few games, the nickname of Matadors wasn't looked on as fondly. In 1932, a newspaper article wrote that the Red Raiders from Texas Tech had beaten New Mexico soundly. Desperate to separate themselves from the losing that the nickname Matadors had brought them, Tech moved on to the Red Raiders nickname officially in 1936. Since its founding, Toledo played without an official mascot until 1923. They lost their season opener to Carnegie Tech. A state over in Pittsburgh, sports writers at the Pittsburgh Daily Post wrote about the game but weren't familiar with Toledo's mascot since they didn't come from there. They referred to Toledo as a mystery team. They asked a Toledo alumnus in the building what their mascot was, and he said they didn't have any. They asked him to give them one. Due to their offensive fireworks in the game, Toledo got written up as the Sky Rockets. Over time, the nickname grew to accompany all athletics teams at Toledo and was shortened to just Rockets. Athletics teams at Troy have been known by a few different names throughout their history, like the Bulldogs, Teachers, and Red Wave. But in 1973, the team was put to a student vote to try and find a new nickname. The students decided on Trojans, calling forth invocations of stories of Helen of Troy, and they've been known as the Trojans ever since. Tulane chose the nickname of the Green Wave in 1920, following a song published in their local newspaper titled The Rolling Green Wave. Before then, they had been known as the Olive and Blue, Greenbacks, and Greenies. It was hard to decide on a logo for the Green Wave, though, so Tulane also went through a few logo mascots. A surfing pelican was the logo for a few years in the 20s. There was a little boy named Greenie in 1945, followed by an anthropomorphic angry wave in 1964. For a short minute, the Greek god Poseidon was almost the mascot for Tulane, but he was denied. Before 1922, athletics teams at Tulsa were known as the Presbyterians, Kendallites, Tulsans, Tigers, Orange and Black, or Yellow Jackets. In 1922, the team adopted the nickname of Golden Tornadoes, but Georgia Tech was also known as the Golden Tornadoes at the time. Instead of sticking with it, Coach H.M. Archer substituted the word hurricane for tornadoes in 1924. It is not, unfortunately, a reference to fields of wheat waving in the prairie wind like I had thought it was, which would be way more creative than what actually did happen. UAB first started a men's basketball program in 1978, but needed a nickname for their athletics programs, so faculty members began asking students what they wanted the name of the new program to be. One student, ironically named Tommy Burns, mentioned the name Trailblazers because the Portland Trailblazers were performing well in the NBA at the time. After some deliberation between Trailblazers and Barons, A group of students compromised on Blazers, which the rest of the school promptly voted to accept later that year. UCF has a long history with phenomenal nicknames. Back when it was known as Florida Tech, UCF's first mascot in 1969 was the Citronaut, a blend of two very Floridian things, oranges and the space industry. Another proposed mascot was the Vultures, due to the amount of vultures that were seen around campus at the time. But neither nickname was popular with students at the time, who instead chose Knights of Pegasus as the nickname in 1970, referencing the space exploration Central Florida was known for. The team remained the Knights of Pegasus until 1933, when a push to rename the teams as the Sharks fell through, and in response, the name was shortened to just the Knights. UCLA's nickname of the Bruins is one of the most unique in college sports, but it exists because someone else had their name first. When UCLA first started its football team in 1919, they were known as the Cubs in reference to its existence as the younger brother of Cal Berkeley, who were the Bears. They changed to the Grizzlies in 1923, but when they joined the Pacific Coast Conference in 1926, they shared a conference with Montana, who was already the Grizzlies. To distinguish themselves, they changed their name to the Bruins, another word for Bears. Prior to 1934, UConn's athletics teams were known as the Aggies, but in 1934, UConn decided to switch their mascot to the Huskies. Huskies were common dogs in the Alaskan Yukon region, and the name of Huskies was taken to reference the alliteration between Yukon and Yukon. UMass's first nickname for their athletics teams were the Statesmen, but they also were known as the Aggies in certain seasons. But by 1948, the university was looking for a more unique nickname for their athletics teams, and they chose the Redmen, in reference to the color scheme and the Native Americans that had been there in the Commonwealth. By the 70s, though, the derogatory nature of the nickname led the team to change names again, this time to the Minutemen in 1972. When UNLV was formed as Nevada Southern in 1957, there were a few options for nicknames, but they ended up going with the Rebels. The referenced rebellion was against a few things. Being a rebel was common in movies at the time, like Rebel Without a Cause, but the most important thing UNLV was rebelling against was Nevada Reno. Their first mascot logo was a wolf in Confederate clothes rebelling from Nevada's Wolfpack. Over time, the choice for a Confederate mascot was questioned, and UNLV began to distance themselves from Confederate imagery. But a rebel isn't necessarily Confederate, and with the removal of Hey Reb from logos, UNLV maintains that their current rebels are more James Dean than Robert Lee. Before 1912, USC's athletics teams were known as the Methodists or Wesleyans. In 1912, looking for a nickname that wasn't just a religious denomination, USC's athletic director asked LA Times sports reporter Owen Bird to choose a new nickname that better suited the university. Bird went with the Trojans, hoping to embody the fighting spirit and determination of USC's athletes. Like Illinois, Utah's nickname of the Utes is in reference to the native Ute people who once inhabited the majority of the state of Utah's borders. In 1972, there were other nicknames that Utah went by, such as the Crimson or the Redskins, but after obtaining permission from leaders of the Ute tribe to keep their nickname of the Utes, Utah has since only used that term for their athletics teams. Founded as an agricultural university, Utah State's nickname has nearly always been the Aggies, with some occasional references to their teams as the Farmers or the Scotsmen. But during the 1960s and 70s, the university almost switched their nickname to the Highlanders, referencing not just the mountainous terrain of much of Utah, but also to Utah State's historical connection to the country of Scotland. Instead, they decided to stick with Aggies. UTEP started its existence as the Texas State School of Mining and Metallurgy. Occasionally, teams at Texas Western were known as the Ore Diggers or Muckers, referencing the trade of mining, but their primary nickname of the Miners was always the most prominent. There isn't much information determining when UTEP made Miners official out on the internet, but I'm assuming it's been Miners at least since UTEP's name changed to Texas Western in 1949 and before it was known as Texas El Paso. UTSA's nickname of the Roadrunners dates back to 1977. The new university, trying to figure out what to call their athletics teams, debated between the Armadillos and Stars in a vote. When the vote was declared void, another vote was set up, this time between Armadillos and Roadrunners. The Ground Bird ended up winning out, thanks to student groups that focused on the popularity of the Looney Tunes character. Meep meep indeed. Tennessee is a landlocked state, so on first glance it's interesting that Vanderbilt is known as the Commodores. The name of Commodores is not actually a reference to nautical history, but a reference to Vandy's founder, Cornelius Vanderbilt, who also went by Commodore. His fortune was based solely on the shipping industry. His nickname was so popular among students that the first athletics teams at Vandy were immediately known as the Commodores. Virginia's gone by a lot of nicknames throughout its history. They were known as the Wahoos, or Hoos, for some of it, followed by the V-Men, Virginians, and also Old Dominion. While students and players refer to themselves as Wahoos or Hoos in reference to what Washington and Lee fans referred to Virginia fans as, there was no official nickname for the school until 1923. The college newspaper put out a contest to give the school an official nickname and song. The song selected was the Cavalier Song, and Virginia's teams became known as the Cavaliers soon afterward. Virginia Tech's nickname of the Hokies comes from a spirit yell created in 1896 called Old Hokie. While the original creator thought he made up the word, the term Hokie is actually a cheer, like hooray or yippee. This combined with Virginia Tech's old nickname of the Gobblers, or Turkeys, to create the modern image of a Hokie, that is, an anthropomorphic fighting turkey. Wake Forest's nickname of the Demon Deacons comes from its rivalry with Duke. In 1920, Wake was the only college in the state of North Carolina that didn't have an official nickname. After a win over their rivals in the Trinity Blue Devils, later to be known as Duke, a student newspaper referred to Wake as the Demon Deacons to one-up the Blue Devils. Washington has had a host of nicknames throughout its history before it settled on Huskies. Starting in 1919, Washington's sports teams were known as the Sun Dodgers, referencing the near-constant rain the Pacific Northwest receives. But the name was seen as making fun of Seattle, so the university changed it in 1921 to the Vikings over winter break. Students came back to school to discover the university changed its nickname without their input, and they got upset. A committee was then chosen to find a new nickname, which came down to Malamutes and Huskies over other options like Olympians and Northmen. A vote at halftime of a basketball game in 1922 led to the decision being made for Huskies. As an agricultural school, Washington State's first few teams in the 1890s were known as the Aggies and Farmers, but they were also known as the Potato Diggers, or Hayseeds. In the 1910s, though, they were led by head coach John Bender, a man of Native American origin, so the teams were informally referred to as the Braves or the Chiefs. By 1919, the university needed an official nickname, and following a football game where sports writers stated that Wazoo's football team fought like Cougars, the nickname stuck. West Virginia started its athletics journey known as the Snakes, but changed it to Mountaineers in 1915 after it was determined that the Snakes moniker was often used to make fun of people from the state of West Virginia. The change to Mountaineers was better suited for a team in the Mountain State and its coal mining history. Western Kentucky's nickname of the Hilltoppers comes from the fact that WKU's campus sits on top of a hill overlooking the city of Bowling Green. They chose the nickname in 1911 when most of campus was up that hill, meaning students had to climb a hill to get to classes every day. When Western Michigan first started their athletics programs, they were known as the Hilltoppers due to the campus's location on top of Prospect Hill. But due to their closeness and frequent competition with Western Kentucky and Marquette, also known as the Hilltoppers at various times in their history, Western Michigan decided to change their mascot to the Broncos in 1939. Like many other Big Ten Conference teams, Wisconsin's nickname of the Badgers was borrowed from the state of Wisconsin's nickname as the Badger State. This is because the lead miners who originally were a part of founding the state of Wisconsin burrowed like badgers while mining for ore, leading to the nickname. Before the university officially adopted Badgers as a nickname in 1889, the athletics teams were also known as the Madison Boys or Wisconsin Boys. No state has adopted the image of a cowboy as much as Wyoming has. The state is known as the Cowboy State, and Wyoming's logo of the bucking horse and rider is actually a trademarked image by the state of Wyoming. It was first used in Wyoming sports teams in 1891 when an off-duty cowboy helped the team in a game against another team from Cheyenne. An opposing player called out the cowboy on Wyoming's roster, and the nickname stuck from there.